So welcome to Food Sensory Product Design Evaluation. The QR code there links to a square which sort of summarises what's in this introductory lecture, plus some comments on the two lectures on the assessments. The assessments are a bit different for this module, of which more in a moment. Okay, module delivery pattern. We'll notice two broad things every week. There'll be some taught content plus some activities, though they do tend to sort of get mixed up. You know the way I teach, I tend to have tutorial activities within the lecture stuff. But there will be some formal workshops as well. The ones in red are for the ICA, which more later, and the ones in blue are for the exam. The exam's going to be a different exam because it's a open book exam. So note the assessments ready through the module. ICA 1 is an individual gap analysis. The exam is an end of semester exam, but it's in open book format. That means you'll be given a resource in the exam to help you develop your answers. This resource will be developed by you during the module. We need to get this done fairly early, so we need to have that in by the end of week 6, so the exam can be ready for internal, external examiners and various other people who need to see it. So we'll be doing quite a lot in the first part of the module on that. Then come the second part, there'll be some labs. The labs aren't assessed as such, but they're very formative for the end exam. They'll cover both sensory methods and modern tools such as rapid sensory assessment. And then there'll be a lab on texture analysis, the now famous Jaffa cakes or biscuits lab. Then winter break, and then exams will be sometime in weeks 1 and week 2 of the new semester, of the new year rather. We don't know the date yet. It'll be a long while before we do know the dates. Okay, so a little bit about how and why we organise the module. Is the module looking at learning outcomes? You've come across these before. The statements describe the knowledge and skills students should acquire by the end of a learning activity. In this case, a module. Effective learning is based on developing relevant learning outcomes, delivering effective learning strategies allow you to master those outcomes, and then using appropriate assessment to measure your knowledge and skills. So there's some learning outcomes there. We'll come back to them in a little while. What we do here is something called constructive alignment. So we decide what the learning outcomes are, which informs how we're going to teach, which informs how we're going to assess, and that goes into an iterative cycle, so we improve things from year to year. So what we're doing this year is a little bit different from what we did last year, and it's a lot different from what was done before when I didn't run the module. The overall process is called constructive alignment. That's how learning works. And something to bear in mind for lots of different contexts. Decide what you're going to do, think about how you're going to do it, and assess whether you've been successful. Okay, so there's the indicative content. I'm not going to read through it. Its potential is topically covered in the module. We'll cover most of them, maybe not all, but we'll certainly cover the vast majority of them. And there you saw broken down into high-level categories and colour-coded. There's some overlap, but it's a good way of thinking about organising your understanding, a theme which we're going to come back to a lot in this module. So for example, in the green sensory evaluation, we have sensory and product evaluation. It also includes things like shelf life testing and also flavour analysis. Okay, so I've lassoed the market research learning outcomes. There's been learning outcomes 1, 2, 3 and 5, and they're the ones that are measured in the ICA, that is the gap analysis, which we'll talk about in the rest of this presentation and one of the ones on the assignments. Everything else is measured in the exam. So all the other learning outcomes, 1, 4, 5 and 6 are measured in the exam. There's a little bit of overlap, but not that much. The consumer, the choice, the trends and consumer choice, understand the consumer, the gap analysis will be done in the ICA, not in the exam. And similarly, shelf life testing, packaging design will be done potentially in the exam and not in the ICA. Okay, the module assessment. There's two components, the gap analysis during week 8 of 30%, and the written component is the exam. Again, it's at the end of the semester, but we do need to do our resource by the end of week 6. So gap analysis, 1,500 words. A gap analysis, and I'll talk about this more in the presentation on the assignment, which will be following this video fairly shortly. It has to be an innovative product. There'll be several lectures and workshops on it. For now, you should start thinking about developing an innovative product. It can be a wild idea, provided it's not completely ridiculous. We'll certainly consider it. What we don't want are things that have been done before 800 times. What we want is you're thinking about some new ideas. And I'll link to some resources such as Mintel in the presentation that's on this particular assignment. That's what we'll be looking at as part of your what we call the gap analysis, things like the market size and what things are growing in the market. So you might say vegan's been a huge trend over the past couple of years. It's about promotion and pricing and a range of other things, again supported by workshops through the module. The image there refers to the stage gate process for project management. Again, we'll talk about this later. For now, we're at the discovery stage, you suggesting an innovative product. The topics for investigation will be reviewed and workshopped again in later module sessions, as is usual. So the exam 70%, it's 2 hours using an open book model with resources developed by students during the semester. Now, if you think about this, can you imagine a professional situation where you sit down at a desk, having only paper and pen, and have been asked to solve a particular problem and make recommendations for future work? It's pretty unlikely, to put it mildly. This open book exam is more realistic. You have a range of relevant materials to help develop your answer. In the real world, of course, this will involve electronic resources and colleagues, so it doesn't exactly model the real world. You might want to think about this in terms of employability. This is a good example of you using technical resources to answer detailed questions. In developing the open book resource, you will have worked in teams with specific responsibilities and have dealt with your communication skills. Again, remember this for interviews. We'll talk about this more in the presentation and video on the exam. Yeah, so that's the sort of broad sort of headlines of the exam. There'll be a number of products, and you'll be asked to develop a range of different things based on the information you have. Methods for sensory, shelf life testing, texture analysis, or flavour analysis. All going to be workshopped throughout. We'll provide you with a copy of last year's exam and some of the material from the open book resource, but not all of it because you'll be expected to develop your own. Practicals? Yep, as I mentioned before, they're very formative for the exam, although they aren't assessed. Cover traditional methods and new ones such as rapid sensory analysis. So these are the two traditional ones, I guess. You might want to look at the British standards for these methods. British standards are quite long documents, and one of the tasks the group will have to do for the open book resource is to effectively find a way to summarise them. Texture analysis, you'll buy some Jaffa cakes. We'll open them at various times throughout the year so that they are aging at particular rates, and we'll measure how the texture changes over time. And that will tell us whether they are cakes or biscuits, and as we'll discover, that is a non-trivial question. And finally, then we'll look at rapid sensory analysis. This is a class of descriptive sensory analysis where participants assess product characteristics. We're using something called napping, rapid sensory profiling technique, where you have a sheet of paper or tablecloth drawn out in a grid to represent what we call a sensory space. Products are placed by your participants on the sheet according to how close they are sensory-wise, how different they are, to produce what's called a sensory map. Samples that are placed close together are more similar, and those placed further apart are more different. We'll analyse the data using something called projective mapping in SPSS. This can be a bit scary, but I do have a full walkthrough of the process. Right, okay, that's that for now. I'll be back shortly with something on the first of the assignments. Thanks for listening.